We have cameras around the room that are recording and that will pick you up if you're on the mic. So please be aware that any papers that you have on your desk could also be broadcast. So pay attention to that. That's important. If the fire alarm sounds, the officers will escort us out of the building and will lead us to safety. Thank you. Okay, and photos may also be taken during the event. So please raise your hand now if you do not want your photo to be taken. No one, okay. Thank you. Thank you all for coming and for choosing to spend this lovely evening with us here. And welcome also to the people online. I'm Dr. Helen Cook, co-founder and director of the Resilience Web CIC. The Resilience Web is an online visualization of environmental and social justice groups in Cambridge, curated by the people who live here. Further, we have nearly a dozen webs across the UK, each which is specific to its place. These webs enable volunteers to find groups and for groups to find each other and to connect around issues they care about. Further, we also host events like these to connect people in person and to understand the issues around resilience. At one of these events, I met Katie Thornborough, counselor and trustee of the Cambridge Room. And Katie and I started talking and wanted to look closely into resilience around a lot of topics. And so this series was started. The Cambridge Room aims to be the voice of Cambridge citizens in policy issues and is open in the Grafton Centre now. So check it out, it's a nice space. This is the final of 6 evenings in this series of events. We've talked about food, reuse, flooding, energy, and communications. And 2 themes that have come across strongly are the need to plan now for the future and the importance of community. Specifically, we've heard about the community response to lockdowns at the Trumpington Food Hub that mobilized to provide food for hundreds of people a day. We've heard about repair cafes, bringing people together to fix broken items, and about community energy schemes in which neighbors can pool their resources and add resilience to their energy supply. These sorts of connections are essential as we head into an increasingly uncertain future. Climate change and geopolitical instability present many risks and challenges for us to overcome. Becoming a resilient city requires deep transformation of the systems that have created these problems. With this series of events, we want to start a public conversation about adaptation and resilience to really understand the issues that we're facing. Resilience often means bouncing back after a disaster, but more than this, we want to look at what can be done in advance to prevent disasters. Resilience is Cambridge aims to understand the issues so we can anticipate what challenges may happen and not be surprised by them. We're doing this in a context where we know the needs of all people are not currently being met. It's not just future problems that are of concern. Cambridge is one of the most unequal cities in the UK, and for many, the disasters are already in progress. To be a resilient city means addressing the injustices that exist today. As we've heard in past weeks, resilience doesn't come from over-optimized and fragile systems. It means effectively using our resources, and it also requires backups and alternatives. Being resilient means being adaptable, valuing diversity, tending to the marginal and the marginalized. Resilience is only possible through understanding root causes and feedback loops in our physical, economic, and social infrastructures. The more ways we have of meeting a need, and the more ways we have of working together, the stronger we'll be as a community. Key to resilience is supporting each other psychologically as well as materially. We survive and thrive together, not as some may think, as isolated individuals preparing for disaster on our own at home, but as a community that insists on a better future for all. Now, just before we turn to our speakers, I'll explain our timing scheme briefly. So it will be green to start, turn to yellow at 1 minute, and then red when the time has expired. So today we have a fantastic panel of speakers to present to us today. And we're going to start with Rippin from the Sortition Foundation. So, Rich.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to get some slides up. Not working. Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to be talking about how we do democracy at the moment and some ideas for how we might do it differently. I'm actually going to begin, if I may, with if I can make my, hang on a second, that's not actually working for me. Yes, it is. Okay, right. Just briefly, so I'm from the Sortition Foundation, and just to explain who we are, we're a not-for-profit company that advocates for real democracy, and we specialize in running democratic lotteries, which is a means of selecting people by what we think is the fairest possible methodology to take part in citizens' assemblies and other deliberative democratic processes. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'll talk in a little bit more geeky detail about what that entails later if I have time. But more importantly, I'm going to talk about the idea of citizens' assemblies and deliberative democratic practices in general. Firstly, I'm going to ask for a tiny bit of audience participation. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hand if you like living in a democracy. Yeah, excellent. Thanks very much. I think we're pretty safe in here. And then secondly, raise your hand if you think democracy is working well currently. Seeing like maybe 1 or 2 hands up and some maybes. So thanks very much, because that's exactly the answer that I was hoping for. I think it is fair to say that we all like the idea of democracy. But obviously democracy means lots of different things to different people around the world. Most governments in the last 100 years have described themselves as the democratic something or other, and the people living under those regimes have had differing opinions of how democratic those systems are. We talk about real democracy, and in doing so, I guess we separate the word democracy from the word elections. The two often are kind of inextricably linked in people's minds, but we think there's another way of thinking about that. To get to the topic tonight of resilient communities, I think that for resilient communities to thrive in terms of governance and so on, there's a couple of really key things that they need that I'm going to focus on to some extent this afternoon. One being trust, and the other being the best possible quality of policy making, which basically is agreements about how we live together, be that in a neighborhood or a town or a nation. And I think in terms of trust, we know that we're in trouble, democratically speaking. So some recent electoral commission research found that over half of respondents felt that elected representatives did not care about people like them. And only 1 in 5 felt that elected representatives did care about people like them. And another finding of many from this research was that people are becoming more likely to say that bullying behaviours towards politicians are acceptable. So I think there's this like 2-way breakdown in trust. And if we care about democracy and we want to thrive in democratic societies, we need to do something differently than we are at the moment. And the ways in which we do that vary, but we think a really key ingredient of building trust back between the governed and those doing the governing, a really crucial ingredient to build that trust back is to have deliberative democratic processes, which I'll talk a bit more about. So what is a citizens' assembly? You may be familiar with the idea, but I just want to focus on the key ingredients of what makes a citizens' assembly. So the first thing you need to have is a representative group of citizens to take part, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that later. But for now, take my word for it that we've got a wonderfully representative sample of citizens. It might be 50, it might be 100, in the room to talk about an important issue of the day. We sometimes talk about wicked problems, so a problem maybe that politicians have really struggled to solve because it's a political hot potato. Citizens' assemblies can be a fantastic way to address such problems. So what do we do with these people once they're in the room? The first crucial thing we do is we pour information in. So we basically present the participants in a deliberative democratic process with good quality, balanced information. So that might be from technical experts, it might be from experts by lived experience. So it's by no means only technical experts. And it will be balanced so that whatever the issue at hand is, people are genuinely receiving input from people with different perspectives, different opinions from kind of across the spectrum in relation to that issue. The second key ingredient, once you've got the people in the room, once you've got everybody up to a certain standard of knowledge, a certain shared level of understanding of the topics through this information that you're sharing with them, is you give people the opportunity to deliberate. And I guess deliberation is such a key word in this whole process. And I think one of the reasons I want to focus on it today is because I think we sometimes have the fantasy that our politics as it happens now is very much based on deliberation. And whilst there are elements of deliberation in our mainstream political processes, I think anybody, any scholar of parliament, say, is not going to seriously argue that when people gather in the House of Commons, that they are going to really listen to people on all sides and to kind of together work out the best policy solutions that are going to serve the greater number of people. We know there's all kinds of machinations around party political point scoring. You know, a politician's job in part is to win elections, and in order to do that, they need to make themselves look good and make the other folks look bad. So there's in that environment, there's I'd say a lack of what I would think of as real deliberation happening quite often. Whereas in a citizens' assembly, people have been selected by lot to take part. They haven't got to worry about winning an election. Their entire purpose and the way that the entire process is set up and convened is to have a kind of cooperative, deliberative exchange. And the aim being to get as high a level of consensus as possible on recommendations at the end of the process. And so crucially, what we're looking for at the end of a citizens' assembly is a public judgment, which is really a very different thing from public opinion. So public opinion in polling or in a single question, kind of oversimplified referendum question, for example, is a very different thing than a public judgment that a group of people can come to when they're given the environment in which they've been given good quality information, given the opportunity to talk to other people, many of whom will be from very different backgrounds from them, will have different political attitudes to them, and they will learn from the experts, the technical experts, the experts by lived experience. They will crucially learn from each other in their small group deliberations. And that will enable them to come to a public judgment, which we believe, and I think it's constantly proven through these processes happening all over the world, comes up with very sensible policy that is representative of the views of a very wide range of people. So that's the basics of what a citizens' assembly is. So quickly on how we go about selecting the participants to take part. So we use this process called sortition, which is basically a fancy Greek word for lottery. And this isn't a new idea. So I always just like to throw the Aristotle quote in here because they used sortition in ancient Athens, and Aristotle wrote that it is thought to be democratic for the offices of constitutional government to be assigned by lot, for them to be elected oligarchic. And I think Aristotle's point is fairly clearly borne out. If you look at the makeup of lots of legislative bodies around the world, they very, very, very rarely look like a mini version of the societies that they represent, certainly in terms of key demographics. So it's an ancient idea. I throw this slide in there to make that point. In terms of selecting people in the UK for these kind of processes, we would start by randomly selecting addresses from the Royal Mail database. So at the beginning of the process, everyone who has an address has an equal chance of being invited to take part. Many thousands of invites are sent out. People are invited to register an interest in taking part, and in doing so, they share some demographic information about themselves, so that we're able to carry out the second stratified selection of the participants themselves for the Citizens' Assembly. Just very briefly here, some pretty graphs to illustrate what it is that we're doing. If I can draw your attention to the bottom line here around education, this is explaining something about how our selection process works. So the left-hand column shows you what our targets would be when we're selecting a group of people for a Citizens' Assembly in a given place. And you can see that here, for example, 24.5% of the people have the highest levels of formal education. That's the population data. Typically what happens in the middle column here, you can see the respondents, the people with those highest levels of formal education, who are probably also the wealthier folk, are significantly more likely to put themselves forward to take part. And you can see the yellow portion, which is people with the lowest levels of formal qualifications, should also be about a quarter of the population. But in terms of those who put themselves forward, they're a tiny minority. We have a clever algorithm that enables us to carry out a selection that basically fixes that. So if you look at the right-hand column for the education level pie charts here, you can see that what's happened in our selection is that we've corrected all the skewing that's happened in the respondents, and the group of people that we're putting into the room to take part in the Citizens' Assembly are much more representative of society at large. We think this, again, creates better policy making because I guess we believe in the concept of the wisdom of crowds and diversity in thinking. And so I think if you have a room full of people of a very similar socioeconomic background with various other characteristics in common, trying to solve problems on behalf of the whole of society, I think they will do a less good job of it than will a group of people that are more broadly representative of that society. I think this is also very appealing to people, the general public at large, because I think people are very much aware that it is the case that there is often a lack of that diversity in some of the legislative branches of government around the world. And people want to see people that look like them in their decision-making bodies. So quickly, why democratic lotteries? Why is that a fair way of selecting people to take part in policy-making processes? So everyone has a chance. On the one hand, everyone has a chance of taking part, and the other thing is no one can push their way in. So special interests, vested interests, have no way of gaming the system. It is by chance whether or not you're invited to take part, and then again by chance whether you're selected to take part. It leads to the representation of often less heard voices. I don't think I've ever seen a Citizens' Assembly that wasn't significantly more diverse and representative of the community in question than most legislative bodies that are selected by election. So as I was saying, you'll get a lot of diverse lived experiences and perspectives on issues in that group of people. And that diversity of thinking will help to solve the problem. There'll be a sense of trust. We know from polling that we carry out every year that people really like the idea of selection by lot. And that's partly because it's like a jury, and we've for hundreds of years trusted our peers to make very serious decisions about our individual fates in the judicial system. And to us, it makes a great deal of sense to use that similar approach around arriving at public judgments on policy. And so if you combine this very fair way of selecting participants with the Citizens' Assembly process that I spoke of briefly before, I think this results in very high legitimacy decision-making in the eyes of the general public and helps to rebuild trust for that reason. I've gone over time, so I'm going to very quickly say there are examples of citizen assemblies all over the world that have done a wonderful job of solving very difficult issues. I was just reading today that the Belgian Senate is possibly about to abolish itself and replace itself with a body selected by lot. We would love to see that happen to the House of Lords. See me afterwards for more discussion on that. Why citizens' assemblies? Truly democratic and genuinely representative, deliberative rather than adversarial, good quality information, the learning phase, and respectful dialogue, the deliberation phase, lead to good decisions and good policy based on the wisdom of crowds. It also rebuilds trust between citizens and politicians in both directions. I've got a great story about that I don't have time to tell. Come and have a chat with me afterwards if you'd like to hear about that. I will now stop. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rich. Next up, we have Hilary Cox-Condron, community artist and pillar of the community.
Charlie, you're going to be doing, oh, thank you. Charlie, you're going to be doing my slides, aren't you? Wonderful. Yes, indeed, my name is Hilary, and I'm a Cambridge-based community artist, and it's very lovely to be with you here. And it's very lovely to be in a Ruchit community dream team sandwich. It's wonderful. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Thanks. So I'm sharing these initial images by way of introduction to some of the themes that we're exploring during this session. What do we value is a question I was asking residents recently as part of a research project led by ARU in order to co-create a community atlas for resilience and ecology platform. What, as a community, are the things that are important to us? Because how do we know what we need to protect and adapt to if we don't understand what is valued? Of course, there are many conversations about food, nature, transport and infrastructure, but also about the value of collective imagination, creativity and community connections. And whilst we continue to reflect upon those themes, I'd also like to invite you to consider what we mean by community. Who does it include? Does it include the voices of all residents, of children? Does it include the animals or our river or trees, perhaps? Okay, next slide, please. Like many of us, my community-based practice as an artist, storyteller and provocateur has been shaped through love and activism, with social and environmental justice at its heart. Exploring, sharing and celebrating creativity, culture, stories, heritage and the natural environment to deepen understanding of our world, inspire new thinking, spark connections and actively address both local and global challenges. So many social and environmental threats to our future have been shaped and exacerbated by inequality, and Cambridge, as we probably all well know, is a city divided by town, gown, high art, high walls, and the greatest social disparity in the UK. There are so many barriers. I do not believe that there are hard to reach communities, but there is definitely hard to reach art, hard to reach culture, nature, institutions, conversations, and democracy. Next slide, please. And so, more and more, I think of my creative practice as making and holding space where arts, culture, collective imagination, shared knowledges, nature connectivity, relationships, and joy can be reached and flourish. Next, please. Thank you. So these images are from a community exhibition celebrating local stories about transformation that I created at the Museum of Cambridge in my role as artist in residence for Ironworks. And I'm going to quote John Maynard, Cambridge's John Maynard Keynes, because I love to. Economist, founder of both the Arts Council and our Arts Theatre here, and son of Florence, social reformer and Cambridge's first female councillor, who would have most probably have sat in here as well, wouldn't she? He said, difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in the old ones, which, for those brought up, as most of us have been, ramify into every corner of our minds. So I'm going to give a few examples of how my creative community practice challenges barriers and reaches those corners of our mind to unbuild those old ideas and strengthen community connections, restorative democracy, and radical resilience. Next slide, please, Charlie, thanks. As someone who is passionate about building resilience through arts and nature connectivity, I love that the word radical is derived from Latin radicalis, meaning of or pertaining to the root. In the words of the icon activist Angela Davis, radical simply means grasping things at the root. And that is what we do when nurturing the creativity that is at the core of us, the root of us, and which then, as we create together, grows and weaves like the mycelium and the signals that are sent through the roots of trees to connect and communicate to each other. Can you read this quote here on the screen from the Dalai Lama? It says, "A tree with strong roots can withstand the most violent storm, but the tree can't grow roots just as a storm arrives on the horizon." These images are from part of the Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination workshop that I was running, building resistance and strength through retelling stories of ourselves and trees. And this is written with feathers, sticks, and oak gall ink that I made. By making space for collective creativity and imagination, we stimulate deep-rooted connections to ourselves, to each other, to our heritage, our planet, and our futures, building that resilience to help us stand the storms ahead. Next slide, please. Thank you. This image is of the fantastical forest, another one of the many Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination arts and nature projects that I collaborate on alongside other artists and many, many residents. We create, exhibit, and sometimes march to the fantastical forest together, working in collaborations with schools, environmentalists, community organisations, and mental health charities. We nurture empathy and nature connectivity, work with the City Council and Wandlebury to commit to and celebrate the Tree Charter, dismantle preconceived ideas about spaces of learning, and create a fertile environment of collective imagination. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I've mentioned collective activation. No, I haven't. I've mentioned collective imagination a few times. We find it easy to imagine apocalypse and disaster or to imagine new generations of technology, but we find it much harder to imagine a better society, a generation or more into the future. We struggle to imagine positive alternatives. What our care or education systems, welfare, workplaces, democracy, or neighbourhoods may be like in 30 or 40 years. And we appear to be much worse at doing this now than in the past. Next slide, please. Welcome to the Imaginarium. I work with Cambridge Carbon Footprint as their Imaginarium artist in residence. Nicole and I developed the first Imaginarium 4 years ago as part of the Cambridge Festival to work towards a fairer and more sustainable future through bringing together researchers, grassroots organisations, and the public. And many more Imaginariums have followed across Cambridgeshire and Fenland, installed in lecture theatres, public parks, shopping centres, libraries, and even taking over King's College lawn. Imaginariums are playful, provocative, and regenerative spaces for communities to come together in conversation and collective imagination, reflecting on the things that are important to us, visualising new ways of doing things, inspiring a longing for something better, and building the connections to generate and support fresh energy and momentum for change. Next slide. Thank you. The Imaginarium shares inspiring examples to provoke creativity, conversations, and connectivity, and offers many different kinds of communication and involvement. For example, drawing, mapping, chatting, making, or just quietly pondering. There is no wrong way. The Imaginarium allows for not knowing what the outcome will be or quite how participants will arrive at it, creating space and trust that wonderful creativity, connections, and ideas will emerge, and they always do. And the Imaginarium welcomes everyone, recognising that whatever age or background, or whether resident, researcher, academic, or campaigner, everyone has experience, stories, ideas and visions that are all equally important as we imagine a better future and consider the actions that we need to take to get there. Thanks. Outcomes have included developing community energy groups, founding the Fenland Environmental Network, and shaping local neighbourhood plans. But we also recognise that making space and taking time to nurture connections, conversations, and our collective imagination is a positive action in itself. If you're interested in holding an imaginarium, I've also developed a free toolkit and resources which you can find on the Cambridge Carbon Footprint website. That's the code for it there. So you saw how creating a space for collective imagination and creativity helped to put residents' voices at the centre of local policy making. Thank you, Charlie. Another recent example is some work that I've been doing with Ruth Sapsed and Fullscope to put children's voices at the fore of decision-making about their well-being and social prescribing. We worked with over 1,000 children in Soham, exploring what matters to them and what makes them feel well through inviting them to creatively map their stories and hopes. Thanks, next slide, please. We analysed all of the drawings to identify key themes, and I created a playful galaxy of their artwork to illustrate them, as well as collaborating with the integrated neighbourhood team to bring the children's voices to the centre of community policies and delivery. We also went to Westminster, along with 2 of the children, to present the project, the Creative Health All-Party Parliamentary Group. Ruth introduced the project with a quote that I love from Jeanette Winterson, saying, "A better story starts with a better story." Next slide. We've just installed this exhibition of the work which I created at Addenbrooke's, and it'll be there for 6 months if you fancy a closer look. So I know that I am coming close to the end of my time now, so I just want to quickly wrap up by mentioning the trials of democracy. Next slide, please. I spent quite a bit of time last year dressed up as an agony aunt on a blow-up sofa in town, asking people how their relationship with democracy is going and whether they actually do give a 4X, along with Patrick Morris of Menagerie Theatre, my creative partner in this public arts project. So we spent the year playfully examining complex social structures, strengthening our democracy muscles, and imagining the future of democracy and our roles in this interconnected story. I've archived the project on the Capturing Cambridge website if you're interested in having a look at it. Next slide, please. I created an interactive installation called "If You're Not at the Table, You're on the Menu," inspired by and including the conversations and contributions gathered throughout the course of the project. But I wanted to wrap up by sharing the key themes that came out of the conversations we had, as we reflected on the qualities that we would like to bring to the democratic table, which I'd assigned as plate settings, the qualities that we need to make space for and nurture within society, government, and ourselves, and with urgency. Next slide, please. Thank you. Knowledge, curiosity, resilience, dissent, justice, compassion, and trust. Qualities which will help to create the fertile ground from which a restorative democracy and resilient, adaptive communities to grow and flourish together. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Next up, we have Ruchit Purohit from the Cambridge Room, researcher and trustee of the Cambridge Room.
Everyone hear me? Yep. Thank you for giving me this chance. Hi, everyone. As Helen said, I'm Ruchit. I'm one of the researchers working on the Cambridge Room project. So the presentation you see is a teamwork. I'm also just recently made a trustee for the charity. So I'm wearing both hats. It's tough act to follow from both of you. But if there was a physical space in every neighborhood where citizens' assemblies could take place, where people like Hilary, the pillar of community and activist, could perform and collect data, but also give back to the community, that would be an urban room. So I'll start with that, but I'll also ask you to put 2 questions in your head and you're saying, how do we get people to participate in urban planning? Not just once, not just twice, but repeatedly. How do we make them active members of community? And connected to that, how do we make this participation more inclusive and more diverse? So it's not always the same people completing your consultation surveys all the time. Neighborhoods are increasingly seen as the most meaningful scale for civic life, well-being, and community resilience, reflecting evolving ideas of healthy city. Public participation is vital for shaping resilient urban futures, yet traditional engagement methods often fail or fall short, even with expanded digital and hybrid access after the pandemic. In-person, community-designed spaces continue to build trust and long-term resilience. Urban rooms have emerged as dedicated environments where residents can shape their neighborhoods. The slide you see is from the website Urban Rooms Network, and we're not the only urban room. They have been going on for more than 11 years now across the scope of UK, and we are one of them. Yeah, so urban rooms have emerged as dedicated environments where residents can shape their neighborhoods, fostering agency, ownership, and shared responsibility. These spaces directly address long-standing weaknesses in public engagement and align with wider policy priorities around inclusion, well-being, and democratic participation. The Cambridge Room project came here, but before that, the research was set in the 4 pilots we did across the 4 nations of UK. So we ran a research project called Community Consultation for Quality of Life, and we tested urban room for 1 month each in the city of Reading, Cardiff, Edinburgh, and then Belfast. The learnings which came are being now installed in the Cambridge Room project. The key learning which I would want to mention is wherever we went, people said consultation alone is not enough. What we kept encountering was a lack of space or spaces where engagement could happen over time, not just around one single project. So how do you have an archive of all consultations together? That's how Cambridge Room with the long-term vision came across. The slide you see are some of the 9 principles we have. You can go on our website and find more details about it. I don't have enough time to read everything. But the photograph in the center is the vision, which was the winning entry for a design competition, and it was won by Allies and Morrison Architects. An urban room which can be flat packed and put in the back of your car and go and do different consultations or engagement across the width of Cambridgeshire. Just a bit of notes. This work responds to gap in conventional participation practices, which often rely on top-down or one-off consultation events that feel extractive and contribute to consultation fatigue. Urban Room addresses these limitations by offering consistent, meaningful environments for dialogue and by centering lived experiences of people, which is frequently absent from the traditional design and planning approaches. The initiative also advances a relational framing of resilience, one that emerges through networks, mutual support, and ongoing dialogue. Urban rooms, with their daily adaptability and responsiveness to local needs, are uniquely positioned to cultivate these conditions. We kind of call multiple hats as well. So we are a one-stop shop for all consultation. We are a shared place for varied activities. We want to eventually be a collective memory of archives, so basically an archive of planning decisions or the ones which failed, and contribute as a learning infrastructure for cities, for people which can go in there. These spaces are often described in the literature as labs or living labs, third spaces. They are not a council building. They're not a university design studio for architects and planners, but they are a neutral space in the city where placemakers and communities can work side by side. Crucially, it's not a top-down consultation. We are working in terms of engagement with communities and not at them. And it's multidisciplinary. It's not just architecture and planning. And they don't work in isolation. The arts, humanities, public health, activism, digital infrastructure, all of them have a role. We started with representatives from these 5 organizations on the left, worked towards growing and building connections, and then kept growing. And that's how we became partners with the Resilience Web. whilst we were researching, we came across a host of events, activities, and organizations that have played a very crucial role in the development of Cambridge. And that's why the wall in Grafton Center, one of our shops, our shop space and one of the walls we converted into a permanent exhibition. We call it the Living Atlas of Community Activism in Cambridge. It shows a map of century of civic action. What it proves is that communities already have rich histories of organizing, and we do not need to start from scratch. And that's why partnerships matter. In the last 12 months since we've been open the shop, we've hosted more than 75 events, and we've interacted with more than 2,200 participants. Now, I'll just quickly go through some of the events, and not all of them, because there's so many of them, but just to kind of give you an example. This photograph is from a one-day symposium we ran last May, when 9 community organizations from Cambridge, alongside 6 leading community organizations from elsewhere in the UK came. They shared all their experiences about community engaged research. The symposium was called Shared Knowledge is Shared Power. Hilary was one of the key speakers. The symposium highlighted latest developments in community-led research. The idea was simple. Communities don't just contribute data, they actually produce knowledge. We've just recently finished a research project, which was commissioned by the Mill Road History Society and the Mill Road Winter Fair, led by my colleague Jo Jang, who gets to define what a neighborhood is and who gets to decide the role in shaping that kind of neighborhood. What does the multicultural urban life and what kind of activities do we celebrate? The project used collective and creative mapping to explore how local residents experience, use, and imagine Mill Road. Through creative engagement, it showcased the lived experience of local residents, inviting reflection on Mill Road's identity, its social life, and how community knowledge can inform future urban development. We've had guest speakers. One of the local historians, he ran 4 lunchtime workshops on the history of Cambridge, but through maps. So we test different methodologies and methods. We've run different sessions, a series called Let's Talk About. This is one of the first ones last March, and it was about the beehive redevelopment and the challenges about it. The most recent Let's Talk About session we run is about the Greater Development Corporation, where DCMS and Peter Freeman from the corporation himself came to discuss and answer questions from the community. We've actually gone to the community. So this one's just a simple example of how we run architectural design workshops with 10-year-olds. So our students from University of Cambridge learning design, who are around 20 years old, were teaching 10-year-olds what design is. So it's kind of this kind of collaborative learning exercise. Every first Saturday of the month, we host different few curated events. One of the examples is repair cafes. From University of Cambridge, teachers actually come and host their design studios in the Cambridge room, which is brilliant because then anybody who's passing through the shop can just enter and see what the students are producing. We've also worked with another community. So we were asked by we were asked by North to Arts organization to do a mapping workshop with them. And this is one of the photographs from that. We worked with public health officers from Cambridge City Council to do a series of map murmurations, which kind of teaching communities how to make maps, but also to kind of not limit them into their understanding what GIS is. These are just some of the examples which we've done. Most recently, we asked Urban Habitats to produce a report for us called the Healthy Greater Cambridge Report, and kind of ending the slides on this image, this illustration produced by Beth Blandford for the Healthy Greater Cambridge Report. It's kind of a hope, of a dream, of a vision which people want for the future. What if, I'm just kind of quoting Councillor Saima Ashraf from Barking and Dagenham Council, where I worked before coming here, and says, imagine a borough where opportunities to interact, to grow, to share and develop skills, regardless of backgrounds, past experience or education, people were allowed to grow. Imagine if they were allowed to transform green spaces into communal spaces, where communities could bond together whilst children played in orchards. Imagine accessible shops scattered through the borough, fitted with high quality equipment and plenty of support, where differences would be celebrated and valued. Cambridge Room, amongst other urban rooms, positions itself as essential participatory infrastructures that cultivate resilience, deepens engagement, and supports more inclusive neighborhood futures. The flexible models, ranging from short research-driven spaces to sustained civic infrastructure, offer promising potential for replication and scaling. The question I asked in the start about, where did it go? Yeah, how do we get people to more participate? It's all about giving people multiple entry points to participate from the way they are coming. You do not go and consult from your boring Microsoft form surveys. Give them an opportunity to participate in different ways and different creations, as Hilary brilliantly experienced, or as Rich present in terms of democracy and citizens' assemblies. Overall, urban rooms demonstrate how lived experience, continuous engagement, and relational practices can strengthen the foundations of resilient neighborhoods and cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchit, and thank you to all the speakers. Really a lot of inspiring information that you've given us tonight. We're writing a report to summarize everything from tonight and from all of the other events as well. And we'll be presenting that on May 28th. So if you're interested in contributing to the report, we would love your help. Please get in touch with me or Katie or Charlie after the event. So, okay, moving on. With us tonight, we have two members of local government. I'm going to introduce you, and then please, you'll have 3 minutes to summarize either what you've learned or to ask a question of one of the speakers. So yes, okay, so first we have Councillor Richard Swift.
Thanks very much. Once again, this is the 6th forum talk. It's been absolutely fantastic. This is the final one, I think, and then in a month's time there's going to be a sort of coming together of all of the different ideas. Everyone's speakers are lit up. Is that a problem? No, is that all right? The thing I liked about tonight was that it was about localism, because a lot of the things have been about international problems and things. It seems to me one of the main issues and problems of modern society is that you have multinational corporations, you have social media that is actually having the opposite of helping young people to communicate. It's actually creating isolation. And one of the things that all of you had in common was getting back to the roots of actually living in a small scale local community. And as I get older, local connection with my local neighbours is increasingly important. And I think it's probably, I hope it's the same for lots of people around the world today. There's the multinational corporations hoovering up all of the sort of human feelings. And one of the ways that you can antidote that is to actually get back to the very, very local, almost in a sort of, from my generation, almost in a sort of hippie type way, that you actually communicate with your local neighbours and you actually enact change from the very local outwards. One of the things I was interested with Rippin was talking about the Sortition Foundation and the citizens' assemblies. I don't know if we've actually got any citizens' assemblies that have successfully taken place in Cambridge, but I'd be interested to know. And one of the things that you made a big point about was about re-establishing trust. There's a tremendous deficit of trust in the world today, often cynically manipulated by to create discord and unhappiness, particularly from populist right-wing organisations, from my perspective. Then Hilary, I mean, I'm from the visual arts background myself. I co-created Chisenhale Arts Centre in London. So I've got a deep interest in the power of visual arts to actually transform, and also the idea of re-engaging with what the purpose of life is. It's not just about material well-being. It's about nurturing why we're here, what we're here for, and looking at the most profound feelings and emotions that actually it means to be a human being. And all of that, once again, comes down to local communication and connection. So I'm very interested in that indeed. And then finally, Richard, the idea of public meetings, I think is really, I personally have started a series of public meetings in my local ward in West Chesterton and local drop-ins and local cafe. There's a tremendous desire for people to actually communicate on a regular, safe environment and actually come together. There's a real need. I think that the more isolated that things like social media make us, the more connections are necessary. And the question, I'm only going to have one question, but I normally ask too many questions. The question I'd like to ask is for Rippin. You were talking about citizens' assemblies. In Cambridge City Council, we started a thing called a cabinet system of governance, rather than the alternative, what was that? Committee system. And at its best, it means that actually Liberal Democrats and Greens and Labour sit in this chamber together rather than tribally sitting Labour over there, Liberal Democrats here and Greens here. We actually communicate better as a result of the physical position in which we're sitting. And we ask more open questions and we don't feel intimidated. Am I going on too long? My question, alternative vote is another example in national government. I've advocated the alternative vote rather than other systems of increasing democracy. What's the connection between citizens' assemblies and those two, cabinet and what's the other one? Alternative vote, for example. Thank you.
So I can't speak authoritatively about the cabinet system that you described. It sounds like a better idea than the alternative. I think in terms of electoral reform, as an organisation, we don't have a position on electoral reform. Personally, I think you could obviously make elections better and fairer than they are under the first past the post system. But I guess our position from the Sortition Foundation would be that whilst you could make elections better, you'd be very, obviously around the world, there are plenty of examples of people using a variety of different more proportional systems. I don't think whilst they address some problems, I don't think they address some of the fundamental problems that we think citizens' assemblies resolve, in that you still end up with quite demographically skewed groups of people. And I think you still tend to have relatively low trust in politics. So whilst I don't think citizens' assemblies are the solution for all magic wand, but I think we'd be really missing a trick if we didn't include them in a really significant way in the mix. And if that happened alongside electoral reform as well, then I think that could be very positive.
Thank you, Richard. Next, we have Councillor Katie Torre.
Oh, thank you very much. This will be really interesting, particularly the food resilience one, which is coming up a lot at the moment, given the international situation. I keep seeing it quoted in the paper. So I've got a few comments and then a question at the end, so I might just jump about in the order, apologies. I mean, I represent the city centre ward. I love the fact that the Cambridge Room is in Kite, huge history of social demonstrations, the Grafton Centre being built. I rather like the fact it's in the Grafton Centre, which is obviously in the 70s, the big kite movement came up through there in terms of Barnwell and the residents who were moved around and the university and the colleges. So that's really interesting. I really like the idea that we need to include failures as well as success. I think there's often a worry when you try something new that it might go wrong and you'll get punished, whereas actually we need to learn. Nothing's perfect. Even the best citizens' assembly, I'm sure there's always things we can learn. So I think that's a really important part of the practice of that. it made me think of mobile libraries. That's the one thing most of my residents know about, particularly some of the more elderly residents who perhaps can't get out so easily. That will arrive in your community. Anyone who watched the film Matilda, yeah, it drives around. That kind of idea, I think, would be really powerful. But it's obviously how we get that embedded in the community for people to understand what it is and avoid that risk that it does only tend to be a certain demographic who might make their views heard. And I agree with you about the surveys. You know, in Cambridge, there's a very clear, so young people tend to be underrepresented, lower incomes tend to be underrepresented. It's really important we bring those in. And for what Hilary was saying, I think that idea of standing in someone else's shoes is so important, looking at it through a different lens. And it made me think of COVID, cabinet predominantly without childcare responsibilities, change a lot of work requirements, and then look quite surprised when about 50% of the population then couldn't go to work because their children were at home and the schools were closed. You know, you need to have those voices at the table. I mean, I'm proud that the City Council here is more representative of working people, of gender balance. It's not perfect by any means, but it compared to many, but there is obviously the idea of income, and if you're on a lower income, it's much more difficult to do. That's the bottom line, isn't it? So, and coming back to Rich, I think picking up actually on what Richard said, we've moved to cabinet, and that means we now have scrutiny committees, and I chair one of them, and they are cross-party and unwhipped. So rather than on the old system where whoever was in the ruling group would go, here's my idea, and the opposition would go, no, we don't like that, and the ruling group would go, yes, we do. And the debate was quite, it's a bit like when you watch Parliament, they're just fighting. What this replicates is more the select committee, where you have people sitting there saying, well, actually, we're not whipped. I might actually agree with you on that, or you might disagree with your group on it. And for me, we're still feeling our way, it's only been a year, but that has been quite powerful because it has empowered, for example, the cabinet have backbenchers who will come and disagree sometimes, which is, I think that is improving things. But I am biased because I chair one of the scrutiny committees, so I suppose I would say that. But it does feel like a positive that, you know, we meet cross-party much more. We're incentivised to get things better before they come onto the table for a vote. So I think that's very positive. I agree it's really, really demoralising, depressing that trust in politicians is eroding. Certainly people see certain national politicians and then assume that we're all like that. My experience of the City Council is pretty much everyone on it is trying to do a decent job. They might have different views from me on certain things, but everyone's trying to do the right thing and trying to support their communities, which is important, I think, but it's not always heard. I think I had a couple of questions about the Citizens' Assembly. So I wonder, it's that idea of legitimacy. It happens in a period of time, but then if it takes a while for their decisions to come forward, and certainly my experience of them is there can be sort of gap between our Citizens' Assembly said this clearly, but by the time it works its way through, I wonder how you address that. And my other question was about the idea of recompense, because obviously you can get the most balanced, stratified representative, but actually if that's someone who's working 40-hour week in a job that can't be flexible, they cannot do it. So I suppose those are my two questions, is the idea of the recompense and balancing the income disparities and obviously reflecting the community and that time lag. Because I think a lot of people like the idea of Citizens' Assembly, but then I'm not sure if you go on the doorstep and say, right, the Citizens' Assembly said A, would everyone agree? You know, it's how we kind of embed them as something that has a value, and that, because obviously once you've listened to the arguments, your view may change, but you've then got to tell the people who haven't heard the arguments that it's representative. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. So I'll answer the one about recompense for participants first. So every process that we ever recruit for offers financial recompense. At the very minimum, you work out how many hours you're asking people to contribute, and you pay them at the very least minimum wage to do that. And processes that are able to pay more get a better response rate, not surprisingly. So I think that's absolutely crucial. And in the same way that local politicians should be paid, local citizens who are selected by lot to take part in these processes should absolutely be paid for their time as a mark of respect, as well as a tool to make it more inclusive for people, particularly on lower incomes. Your question about the potential gap between Citizens' Assembly processes and recommendations, and then that translating into policy in the real world. So at Sortition Foundation, we advocate for powerful, permanent citizens' assemblies, and I think you would solve a lot of the problems that come about through kind of one-off citizens' assemblies if you had permanent powerful citizens assemblies in place. A key conversation that we have with people who are thinking about having a citizens assembly for the first time is, how does this link in with your policy making framework? Because if you can't really answer that question, it's probably not really worth having a citizens assembly right now. There is definitely a risk, and there have definitely been processes where there's been a fantastic selection of representative people. There's been a fantastically facilitated process with fantastic information, great deliberation, great recommendations, and then they go on the shelf and nothing happens. And to your point about acceptance among the general public, I think you're right. If you were knocking on doors at the moment and saying we want to have a policy of bringing in, let's say, a permanent citizens assembly in Cambridge, you'd get a lot of blank faces right now. So certainly one of our goals is to make citizens assemblies better known in the public imagination, because we know that when people do hear about them, there is tremendously strong support. And so, yeah, there's a real issue there about just education at this point.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to give a thought? Don't worry if not.
Thank you. I just wanted to reflect a bit of what you said, Richard, about communities, and just saying that that was something that was such a huge feedback that we got from so many people when we were doing the Trials of Democracy project, that it came back very much to feeling like these everyday acts of democracy in our communities were actually really strong things doing when people were feeling maybe a little bit helpless, and then realizing that actually that's a real strength. So yeah, it's great.
Great. Thanks to the councillors for taking the time to be with us tonight. We're now going to move into general Q&A. So Charlie will take the question, and also questions from online.
I also, apologies, I'm going to have to do some boring description of how this all works. So we'll do some Q&A. We've had a few sent in to me personally. Those online, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. You can ask them yourself and you'll unmute, or I can ask them for you. So please mention if you prefer which way. If you're in the room, you of course can raise your hand and I'll come to you. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question yourself, there should be pieces of paper somewhere, I believe, or you can grab a piece of paper from up here and write it down and pass it, and I can pass it to me or to Katie, and we can ask for you, or to Helen, of course. You will notice all the microphones in front of you. Please make sure that you press the button and it's red, so that the people online can hear you, and you will be heard in the recording as well. Let's make sure I've got everything. Yes, please try and address your speaker to a specific question to a specific speaker if you can, and keep them focused on the issues that have been raised, not on politics where you can, because we're here to talk about how we might improve rather than get into party politics. Wonderful. Before we do questions, I will just quickly say that you've seen some leaflets in front of you. There's this leaflet, which is the Cambridge Rooms leaflet. If you're a community group or know of a community group that's looking for a space to use in the Grafton, as Ruchit has mentioned, you can do so here. Feel free to take those away from you, and any of the leaflets in front of you, you can take away. You'll notice, and there's some more outside if you want some more, and some others. You'll notice there's one about the people's briefing. So I'm going to quickly ask Elizabeth to stand up and give 1 minute about what that is.
Thank you, Charlie. Yes, so one of the reasons I guess that we're here today is because of the climate and nature crisis. So my name's Elizabeth, and Polly here. We're coordinating the showing of this film, The People's Emergency Briefing. The first one is on the 18th of April, and it's practically not sold out because the tickets are free. But if you go there, you'll get the details of all the other showings. We'd love to see councillors there as well as MPs. If you can't make the 18th of April, we hope you'll come to one of the other showings afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We recommend it's a national effort with many amazing speakers, people you will recognise as well, national public figures, as it were. And of course, you've got the Resilience Web flyer as well. So please have a look at that if you're looking for community groups in your area. Right, that out of the way. There's more people online, more people in the room than online. We peaked at about 20 online. But because of that, we'll start with any questions in the room. So if you've got any questions, get your hands up if you're interested, so I can make sure I've got them in head. Wonderful. We'll come to you first, and then we'll come to you, and we'll come to you later, Chris. Yes, please go for it and unmute yourself for the mic.
Hi, thank you so much for all your presentations. I'm sort of finding this thread between all three of you. So where, Rich, you mentioned about the people, it's based on the census, then who actually signs up, then who gets selected. How does that selection process work? If most people who signed up were from, say, a certain group, because the reason I asked that, and possibly I want to sort of stretch that question to Hilary and Ruchit as well, to say all the sessions that take place at the Cambridge Room, or all the art-based imaginariums and sessions that take place, do you find the certain type of people or demographic or certain, certain people showing up to these kind of things? I mean, even here, I would imagine it's certain type of people who show up to these kind of sessions. I suppose I'm wondering about how do we hack that algorithm and reach different groups of people and make art and assemblies and rooms more accessible to everyone?
So I'll answer on the citizens' assemblies front. So, I mean, essentially, we have the technical fix for that, I guess, is the answer. And it's partly about the number of invitations that you send. So it partly becomes a budgetary thing because that costs money. But so to give you a brief idea, for every one person that we want in the room, we send 300 invitations. So that's quite a lot of post if you're trying to recruit 100 people to get into an assembly. But obviously, so we've worked out that that's basically the number of invites you need to send in order to get a large enough pool of respondents from which you're going to carry out your selection. So even if your pool of respondents looks very skewed, you will still have enough people in those categories that are less well represented in the respondents pool to hit your demographic targets for the 50 people or the 100 people or whatever it is. And then also we do other things to make it as accessible as possible to people. So including obviously offering to pay them to be there, offering free childcare or other care cover if people have those needs. And also just generally try to provide whatever support people need to take part. So if they're having to travel, if it's a national process, obviously paying for people's accommodation, paying for people's food, and building a relationship with those people once they've been selected to make sure they feel like this is a place that is for them. Because obviously there are people, like so highly educated people who are used to having their voice heard all the time. Probably a lot of the people sitting in this room today would feel more confident, and there's a whole raft of people who would feel less confident. So having good support in place to help those people feel like this is for them is another really crucial aspect of that.
Lovely, thank you. How do we reach different people? For myself, with workshops or invitations, I work in parks, in shopping centres, in schools, with community groups and community meals, youth clubs. Going to where people are is like that's vital. Yeah, be where people are, and going to for me actually it's different ways of being, aren't they? But you're still. And also, you spoke about trust a lot, didn't you? And I think for my own personal work, I'm really old and I've been in Cambridge a long time working with people. So, I mean, I've built up part of being part of a community, being part of activism, being part of city council engagement, being part of different groups, sort of really just being embedded in the community really helps to build trust. And I mean, saying really old, but I'll tell you why I said, obviously I'm not. But I work now with teenagers that I used to work with. So, just really embedded in Cambridge and Cambridgeshire, actually, community by working out there. And it's a real advantage, I think, of just kind of flitting around a lot, which is the way that I work myself, yeah.
Yes, that is one of the questions which we are constantly trying to ask ourselves and trying to make our work as far as more and more inclusive. So the projects which I mentioned before coming to Cambridge, so from Reading, Cardiff, we made sure we were open at least 5 days a week at different times, some of them on weekends, some of them after hours, after 5 p.m. You want to make sure your team looks diverse as well. That absolutely makes a big difference. And continuing from Hilary, as I said, you don't just expect communities to step out of their homes for you. You will have to go where they gather as well, and give them multiple entry points to participate. For example, the Edinburgh Urban Room was just next to the Waverley station, but then it had pop-ups where you could just flat pack the things and go to 2 different venues. One was an arts and cultural center, and one was a village hall church kind of thing on the peripheries of Edinburgh. So there are multiple ways of approaching this. One of the researchers we encountered in Reading mentioned about something called gap analysis, which also I think in terms of seeing the demographics of the borough and then seeing how many people are participating, and then trying to see where the gap lies, and then you address it. With Cambridge, we've done a very soft launch. The previous urban rooms were just 4 weeks each, so we had to make sure we were as perfect with that. Over here, we wanted the communities to come and take in charge. So when we started, we were just 2 researchers opening the shop, but then we had on Mondays, the shop opened by Retrofit Hub. Fridays was opened by Resilience Web. Saturdays was opened by the Repair Cafe. And that's how, when communities start taking ownership, is what we want to aim towards, rather than them being forced to take in charge and then the idea dies down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very helpful answers. And we'll come to you next.
Thank you. And my question is to each of the 3 speakers, because each of them talked about a different setting in which it was possible to bring people together and to work constructively. And I want to use an example. It is a foreign political example, but I'm not bringing party politics into it. When Joe Biden came into the presidency in the United States, he followed the presidency of Trump. And Biden had grown up in a setting where you work across the aisle. He was a Democrat, and he was accustomed to working together with the Republicans to bring about constructive solutions to whatever the legislative calendar or approach was. Now, when he came in as president, that was not possible anymore. And it took him an awfully long time to realise that working across the aisle was not possible because of the change that had come about because of the Trump presidency. So the question I want to ask is, how do you actually, when you have your assembly, when you have your artists getting together, and when you have your people in the room, you're not going to have everybody agreeing, as you've said, but how do you deal with the problem where some of the members are, say, intransigent, where some of them might be bullies, where some of them have particular approaches that they're not going to be moved on, because we don't live in a world where everybody can actually agree with everything, however much you try to make that happen. So how does each of your processes deal with that sort of a problem? Thank you.
Who wants to take that first?
Okay, I'll go first. We made sure whenever we started the urban rooms in any of the places, or we had a set of principles. It was advertised on every web page, as well as it's it's printed and it's put on over in the urban room. The point is that we want to come across as neutral. That's why, even though we started off as a research project from the Department of Architecture at the university, we cut the cord and we said, now we're a charity, we're independent, and if this is going to be a neutral space, we will conduct this space as where discussions can happen, but we will not be taking decisions for you. We can try and make an archive of all these events that are happening, and we would want builders, developers, decision makers to actually have a look and see what the communities are saying. But but that's not the only way. So whenever a new event starts, like simply talking about the Let's Talk About series, where we spoke about the beehive regeneration last March, and it was very charged. We had some of the resident organizations really emotional speeches, but then also the councillors and the people in the planning committee trying to explain what their status is and how they were dealing with what was happening from the central government. So eventually it's all about how you chair those panels. It's also about how we have this chairing, what Resilience Web has done in the last six sessions. It's just about making sure everybody gets a chance to speak or everybody feels that they've been heard. So trying to balance that. I'm not saying we have the answer, but trying to work towards it.
Thank you. I'm actually not sure what I'm going to say, and I've just pressed my speaker. I can't actually think of an example, although there must have been somewhere it's been really, I can imagine it got heated talking about like developments. I think what you were saying about having an agreed way of working, sort of, we would have that in the space about respect and about listening. And I think that being really clear that everybody's voice or work is being heard and is being recorded, which is, you know, what happens if people are happy with it to be, with their work to be. But I haven't had that in a huge way. So sorry to not say anything too thrilling. Then maybe just everybody just likes colouring in. That's the answer. That's the answer. Paint and snacks.
If I could say, Hilary, something I've experienced from your work is that I think speaks to this person's question. Sorry, computer's in the way. Is the fact that oftentimes the first contact will be like that, but by having such activities that do sort of humanise everyone a bit over successive contacts, that you find that people find that they are more aligned than they might otherwise realise. And so having a variety and a diversity of activities with a portion of some people coming to successive ones can help sort of overcome some of those elements of silo that can exist when we sort of are very focused on the specifics of what we might be interested in. And I think that's something that your Imaginarium that I've been taking away a lot from, is the fact that actually you have an opportunity to talk with people you might otherwise not meet because you're sort of got your certain friends or groups and things like that. So I think it's as part of that process is there's sort of no one moment that it's fixed so much as a slow move towards understanding these things where we've sort of slowly gone the other way. And then I see Hilary's got her thing on, and we'll come to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Saying that. Thank you.
I'm really glad you said that, actually, because my first response was going to be most people are okay. So I think the problem doesn't arise that much. But in terms of how you deal with it when it does, I guess you try and create an environment that makes it less likely to arise, and also an environment that has, you know, competent people to deal with it if it does. So very high quality facilitation. And I think so that's partly about having very good facilitators. It's also about having enough facilitators. It's also about working in appropriately sized groups. So one thing about citizens' assemblies that I didn't mention specifically is that they almost always, well, I think probably always have a lot of very small group work. So if you've got 50 people or 100 people, of course, there are some plenary sessions where you're getting input from experts and people with lived experience and so on. But the deliberation pretty much almost all happens in groups of 5, 6, 7 people, each one with a facilitator to keep the peace if that's necessary. Yeah, it's still red. Oh, now it's working again. Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about citizens' assemblies from the perspective of the experience of the participants is that I think people very, very commonly come away amazed at how collegiate and civil and cooperative people are, particularly when they meet those people for the first time and realize that they are in different Facebook silos and, you know, just wildly opposed to each other's political beliefs. But it's really common in those scenarios to end up with like 70, 80% consensus on recommendations at the end of the processes. So I think a well-facilitated process combined with the fact that most people are fundamentally pretty much okay, means that it does tend to work.
Ruchit, you want to come next? Then we'll be taking 2 questions online, and then we'll come back into the room.
Yeah, so just wanted to continue from what Rich said as well. So, and to what I said earlier as well. So when there are planned events, we kind of plan it for that. But the thing about urban rooms are these are open shops, and anybody can just enter in and vent. And something which all my interns across University of Reading, Cardiff, Edinburgh, and they were like first or second year architecture students who were volunteered to design the space because they love designing and all that. But standing there, architects had no idea of how to actually communicate with people. So they were learning that. On top, people would just come in. We had a random person come in the Reading urban room asking, there's a leakage in my building. I want to talk to a council. I'm like, no, we can actually kind of signpost you whom to contact. There's this wall of post-its things you can connect. But we were in Belfast and somebody was really passionate about what was going on there in terms of that time and politically very charged. But what I'm telling is my staff is kind of learning day by day. At the moment in Cambridge room, I have some of the volunteers there and they'll be happy to tell about how people just enter and asking, what's happening with the Grafton Center? Can somebody tell me? And why are they not listening to us? Or where will I do my local shopping? And we're like, we can't answer all your questions. But this physical space is what they're offering is somebody who just wants to vent out. And we're like, would you like to have a cup of coffee? That's it. All they need is to have a cup of coffee with you and they are fine. And they're on their way doing something else. But then this space becomes their own. They would like to come back again. And other spaces I've worked with, they're like, can I come and water your plants now? So that kind of relationship and trust development is a long-term thing in communities. And ideally, there should be an urban room in every neighborhood. And that is the way where people can just voice out what's happening. Or if they missed out something, they'll go and see a video recording as of today kind of thing and learn from that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ruchit. We're now going to come to 2 questions online and we'll come back into the room. So get your questions ready. And I haven't forgotten, Chris, if you wanted to present yours, if you had got your hand up early. Well-timed, Ruchit, I shall got a couple of questions for you. I'm going to combine them together because they're sort of feed off of each other. The first one is, and I can read these out again for you, it's no problem. The first question is, you've spoken a lot about the role, vision and ambition of the Cambridge Room. Reflecting on the learnings so far from this urban room and others, how representative has participation in events and activities been? And what do you think are/have been the main challenges for improving inclusive participation in planning and policy? And then I've got a follow-up question which relates to that, and I think that will go to all speakers, so get your thinking ready, is what do you find is the most effective way to show people the impact that they have had when they have shared their voices in these variety of events so that they feel inspired to continue to engage? So the first one is for you, Ruchit, about challenges for improving inclusive participation in planning and policy with your understanding of the urban rooms and Cambridge specifically, and then talking about impact and how you show that to people, to the panel.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, so just to kind of reiterate what I said previously as well. So at the moment, we did a very soft launch, and it was all about building our networks and then trust and asking partners to host activities. So it has been very, very open. We've been trying to be as good at communication as possible. So we've got more than 600 people on a mailing list, 1,000 people following us on Instagram, and around 200 on Facebook. And then we got almost 900 people following on our LinkedIn channel. So we have people who we're trying to reach, but we want to do more. It has been but challenging in the terms of who is leading the project. We're trying to be as democratic as possible. And that's, in my opinion, a bit of fallback. So we need a bit more in terms of guiding, in terms of communications. The project I was talking about, I worked in Barking and Dagenham. We would distribute 80,000 newspapers with a series of like 6 weeks program of activities, and this will go to door. So how do you reach out to people who are not on social media, for example, or not following your email? How do you connect with council and other organizations and try and tap into their resources. So that I understand there are like so many WhatsApp residential groups that exist. I'm really appreciative of the fact that the City Council is hosting an every 6 monthly event called Engage, where all NGOs come together and they get to know each other. So I think we want to eventually, if we have a bigger space, host something like that in future, but also be a part more of all this. There's almost 7 WhatsApp groups, which is an outcome from Engage that could work with. So I would want to be as inclusive as possible, but it is a journey.
Well, thank you. And we'll move on to the question about impact. I'll read that once more because I know it can be hard to remember. Is what do you find? And thank you for that original question from really appreciate it. And this question is from Neve Campbell. Is what do you find is the most effective way to show people the impact that they have had when they have shared their voices in these variety of events so that they feel inspired to continue to engage? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's really important to do that. It's really important to show that it has had an impact. You know, it's absolutely vital. So, for instance, with the Imaginarium, we would share information at other Imaginariums and online and in Cambridge Carbon Footprint newsletters. But actually, I think it's such a good question because I think not just for my work as a community artist, there are many community groups and artists working in this way, and actually being able to collate that and to keep showing the impact that people have all the time, and to not be working individually and trying to show it. You know, really to pull that together, I think would be a really strong thing for the city to be able to do, and it would be a real sort of boost of momentum. So I say yes, I tried to show it by going back to schools, writing reports, showing in exhibitions and all of those ways. But I think there must be a bigger way to be able to do it as a whole sort of movement. Thank you for that question.
So yeah, how do you show people the impact that they've had? I think from a citizens' assembly perspective, the first thing you do as the commissioning body, so let's say a city council, for example, commissions a citizens' assembly, they should make it very clear to the participants from the outset, before it's happened, what's going to happen with the recommendations. So you make a commitment in advance, and that will vary depending on the politics of the commissioning body. I have heard of municipalities in Poland where a citizens' assembly has been commissioned, and the mayor or the leader of the council or whoever the kind of key decision-making powerful person was, made a commitment in advance that if they achieved 80% consensus on recommendations, that they would do everything within their power to implement that as policy. That's quite a high bar. Like I love that. A lower bar would be for the commissioning body to say, and I think this happened for a process that we ran on the island of Jersey, where the politicians made a commitment in advance that they would respond to every recommendation that came from the Citizens' Assembly. So that might be saying, yes, brilliant idea, thanks very much, we're going to adopt that. It might be saying, actually, we think that's impossible because, or we're not going to do that because. But basically having honouring the effort that people put in to that process by fully publicly responding to it. So I think for me, that's what people should be doing at a minimum. And then obviously honouring that commitment and doing it, following through on that. I think kind of next level, if you like, is that you should have a carefully designed process that brings participants back at regular intervals after the Citizens' Assembly has formally concluded, I guess, to hold decision makers to account to some extent. And again, there are some processes that are specifically designed with that in mind, where there's a whole kind of accountability kind of mechanism built in that doesn't stop on the day that the Citizens' Assembly finishes. And then obviously from our point of view, best case scenario is that you have permanent, powerful citizens' assemblies that become an embedded part of how we live together and do policy together, in which case, obviously if that were the case, then over time people would become very confident that their input into such processes was going to lead to real world outcomes.
Wonderful, thank you so much. You've given me a great plug, which is good to hear we're doing it well. As mentioned, we're doing the report. So if you're interested to contribute to that, all these inputs we put into that report, but if you're particularly keen to help us with that, do get in touch, come to chat to me or Helen or Katie. Good to hear we're doing a good, we did it before we realised it was excellent. And we've got about 20 minutes left of questions. We'll come back into the room. I know, yep, you've got a question, Chris. Do you still have one? Does anyone else? Yes, so we'll go Chris, Benjamin and this gentleman here.
Thanks very much to the speakers and all of the other participants in a really interesting and stimulating conversation this evening. My name's Chris Poynton. I organise a network of people taking action on climate and nature in the community around Cambridgeshire. I'm also on the Community Development Board of Together Culture, which is a community wealth building activity organisation in the city. In both of those scenarios, I see a gap between what the local government wants to achieve and how they want to engage, and what the community is shaped to sort of dock onto it. And it feels to me like there is an opportunity that there's a sort of a skills requirement, both from the people who participate in the participatory democracy and in the people who are in a place to shape and convene it and build programs. I'm just wondering what the panel have seen that's worked, or that are good signs or good practices that would lead towards sort of a getting momentum going in the skills of the officers and the councillors, the skills of the communities and the capability of the community organisations to interlock with them. I feel like it's a really key component, and I'm looking for clues to see if we can move it forward.
This is going to be a bit not as specific as I would like it to be, but I recently, I guess in terms of like how can we get, if I'm understanding your question rightly, it's partly saying like how can we get, in a sense, like councils and citizens working better together. And not surprisingly, my answer is citizens' assemblies. But that is, it's based on lots of things, but it's just partly based on a conversation I happened to have had last week with the organisers of a citizens' assembly that took place for a local government area in Scotland. And one of the really heartening things that stuck with me was about the trust that was built. And I think I already was very, very strongly aware of the fact that citizens can quite often feel more trust in politicians and government and civil servants after they've taken part in a citizens' assembly process, because, you know, rather than just being on Facebook or being an activist or just being a person with an opinion on a thing, they've had to sit in a room with other people and talk about trade-offs and talk about the complex you know, difficult discussions that council officers and councillors will be really familiar with having those difficult conversations. And I think, yeah, citizens taking part in these kind of processes really get that. And so I was well aware that was a benefit of citizens' assemblies, is that citizens come away feeling that sense of like, oh yeah, this stuff is actually really hard. And whilst I might still disagree with politicians and I might still be angry with them about some things, I can see that like making policy is a very difficult thing. The feedback I got last week from the organisers of this process in Scotland was that the trust kind of built the other way around as well, in that I think politicians, including local politicians, experience of dealing with the general public in official contexts is sometimes pretty hostile and unpleasant. And obviously we're aware that there's like a rising tide of kind of unpleasantness, if you like, on that front. And what the politicians were reporting back to the organisers of the Citizens' Assembly was that it was a real joy for them to be interacting with citizens in this forum that is so deliberately set up to be kind of collegiate and deliberative and cooperative, and they were having interactions with citizens that were just so much richer than they would often find in a traditional kind of consultation where the usual suspects from the public would come along to have a shout at the politicians. They'd be dealing with this like more representative sample of people who were in this environment that was geared towards a more constructive way of having a dialogue. I hope that answers you at least a bit.
Thank you. I mean, I'm going to say citizens' assemblies too, because you know that I love that, and it was great that you were part of the trials of democracy too, Rich. I'd also say, just reiterate really about different ways of entry. I think that was the term that you used, wasn't it? And ensuring, creating an atmosphere where everybody knows that their knowledge is important, that everybody's knowledge is important, whatever their background, if it's their lived knowledge, or if they are a child, or if they're experienced something, if they are a researcher, or if they're a campaigner, everybody's knowledge is really important. And I think that sort of hierarchy, especially in Cambridge, is unhelpful. It's unhelpful. Yeah, listen to children, listen to everybody, and find different ways of listening. So I've got to say colouring in again, but that's not all that I do, obviously, but create an atmosphere that is inviting to people, where people feel comfortable, have different ways that people can either can stand, or can sit on the floor, or can be chatting to their mates, or can be watching perhaps a film that some footage perhaps of maybe the city in the past, or something like that, that stimulates ideas. Ask people what it is that they love, not just what they want to change or what they dislike. Ask them what they love and what moves them and what they feel connected to. I think just sort of and pulling on this idea, creating an environment for imagination. I mean, I said imagination a lot, but I think it's really vital. And I think that our imaginations have been so quashed really in the society that we live in, and in the education system that we put our children through. Our imaginations are really quashed. And so we are not able, you know, we need stimulation, I think, to just keep nurturing them, so that we can have really constructive and fruitful and visionary conversations. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I don't know what more to add, but I had some points, but completely agree to what Hilary and Rich were saying. It's about, as Hilary said in one of her slides, it's about holding space to listen, but also so people feel heard, but also knowing power, that who holds power kind of thing in that area. But when you have people who are elected, or people who are builders or developers and local community activists, all of them in one room, how do you make everyone feel that they all are equal? And I think deliberative decision-making tools are evolving, as we say. So something I had learned about in research 10, 15 years ago when citizens' assemblies were coming was this entire thing about the diamond of participatory decision-making. So when you bring people together, all they do is they talk about this, and so the ideas expand, but then they all converge together. And it's all about that time and knowledge when everybody is on the same level and they're talking it out and saying, why are we demolishing this pub, which is historic and brings so much value? You know, that entire charged thing about, but there is certain research gone behind it and it will bring more value or not, I don't know. But the fact is that let everything out in the diamond of decision making, and then let them all come to a decision together, which for some, it will still be not value or helpful, but they will understand where everybody else is, kind of thing. So it's about creating, as I said, that entire thing about an equal space.
Can I just add something really quickly? Listening to you there, actually, I think it's about storytelling, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, saying that a better story starts with a better story, and we can understand storytelling and listening. It's about storytelling and creating our stories together.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. We'll come to you now. And if we can, we're slowly coming to time. So try and direct them at a person if you're able to.
I'm sorry, mine's less a question, more a point about the arts in Cambridge. And I think if we were to have more diversity, it would be a more supported thing. But I think one of the huge problems with Cambridge is access to workshop or studio or exhibiting spaces. It's, unless you're rather well off, it's not going to come to you. And I think that's the way to create communities in Cambridge with the arts, is to create more spaces where people can hang out and drink through new exhibitions and private views and the rest of it. The more that happens, the more exciting and interesting I think grassroots making and exhibiting stuff would be. At the moment, it's completely dominated by the universities. That's where all the money goes to. And that's my.
Thank you so much.
sort of point.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone's done a great job of giving me segues here. I'll add a comment from someone online which speaks to this. We won't answer it, but this is a helpful thought. We've heard a lot about deliberative democracy and the ways to diversify participation in vision, planning, and policy making on a local level. These seem essential processes for helping to build more resilient cities, places, and communities. But there hasn't been much discussion about what else resilience means at a community level and how we can work towards it in perhaps a less formal or less policy orientated way. There was a bit about this in some previous events that sort of lent into it a bit more in terms of food and communications. Perhaps this is something we might be able to pull out as the themes in our report, which I think is a very good input. So thank you for that. We should add on this as well that we are beginning to think about follow-up from this series around solutions, because we're sort of talking a lot about the problems and sharing knowledge, but we want to try and follow this up with some sort of solution workshops in the future. So look out for those. Next, we will come to you. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, my name is Tom Lord. I have the privilege of working at the Sortition Foundation. And I just wanted to try and answer, so Councillor Richard Swift asked, has there been one of these kind of processes in Cambridge? Is this successful? There's actually been a few in the Cambridge area, but one that springs to mind that ties together something that I think everyone on the panel is talking about is the Ideas Exchange, which was a forum run by Developers Town when they were looking at developing the northeast Cambridge site around, Cambridge North and the A14 and so on. And they ran one of these kind of small, one of these processes where they got a representative group of people from the northeast Cambridge area to look exactly at urban planning issues in diverse and creative ways. They had this group of, I think maybe 15 people or thereabouts for more than a year. They met 17 times. They went and walked around the site. They played with maps. They got to know each other. They had all these conversations about various issues of planning. So just to say, yes, it can work. Now, obviously, the Northeast Cambridge site hit a roadblock, right? So that's not in itself, that's not the end of the story, but the experience was so powerful and positive that they have since gone on to use that approach in a new development in Hemel Hempstead more recently. And I think, does that solve all of our issues with community? No, but if there is something that addresses something that each of the people on the panel is talking about in this way that there's a lot of positive energy towards, maybe that is a good thing. Maybe the future is bright and we're on the baby slopes of moving toward that. Thank you.
I didn't know that. That's great. And Town and you and I were doing some really good work, because I was also working with them in a primary school over a few terms. I think it was working with the children there to examine what makes a place, and that was also feeding into the work they do. And then I worked with groups of teenagers to run workshops to develop a strategy for young people, for planners and developers. So, I mean, doesn't that show a way of working in many different ways to be able to develop ideas? Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so it's called the Hartrees Ideas Exchange, and it was led by Town. And one of our students from the Department of Architecture, Gustav, he wrote the report, and it's on the Cambridge Room website. Oh, and then the most recent one from Hemel Hempstead, it's under process, so it should be out in the next month. Yeah, but that's what we're creating, an archive of good practice case studies.
Thank you so much. And I would recommend, if anyone has a free afternoon or is walking by the Grafton Centre and sees the Cambridge Room open, going to have a look at the history of activism that Ruchit mentioned. It is really interesting as someone who came to Cambridge not as a born local. We now have a question online that's for you, Ruchit, but I might expand it out again slightly. So for you specifically, Ruchit, what do you need to scale up the Cambridge Room to more locations and more communities? I think this is particularly pertinent given that we've talked a bit about exhibition spaces and how do we open up spaces. What are sort of, I guess, what are the barriers that you've experienced in terms of enabling more community spaces for the Cambridge Room specifically? But I'd also like to open that up to the other panelists if they had any insights from their own activities and trying to find spaces for the public to use permanently. So the question specifically is, what do you need to scale up the Cambridge Room to more locations and more communities?
Yeah, ideally we would need more partnerships and communities taking ownership. It's easy to launch a space, and we've done a bit of history on these kind of spaces. And I don't know how many of you know about the architecture centers, and they opened they popped up across UK. Like one of the most famous ones was the Bristol one. What happened was it was always the same community going into these architectural centers. There's really nice posh places with exhibitions and models and events which hosted only them. Even though they wanted the communities to come, it became this barrier. So how I see it possible is to have making inroads in the communities. And when you saw the map growing, as well as is about making those networks and seeing if any existing organization has the space to hold it, kind of thing. So one of the reasons we are partnering with Resilience Web and making those connections. So when we started talking to Resilience Web 3 years ago, it was a few webs in Cambridgeshire, but you're like, what if there were 10 webs across Cambridgeshire from Peterborough to Huntingdon to South Cambs? And then these organizations started holding space, and we provided them the learnings and toolkits, and then these pop-up spaces can open, but then they'll be run by them. So it belongs to them and it should be run by them. So that's the challenge. But again, as I said, we are transitioning from this very research phase of 1 month each to like now 12 months. So we are yet to see how it grows. And any ideas welcome. Yeah.
I'd like to see places of collective imagination everywhere. I'd like to see our imagination and nurturing our imaginations together everywhere, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our councils, on our high streets. I think what the gentleman here was saying about having more studios and more art out on our high streets and in our communities really helps to support that. And we just need more open community spaces, I think, everywhere where people feel comfortable. Our community lounges are places where people can mingle. You know, we heard that that's where democracy starts, didn't we? We've spoken about that's where democracy and resilience starts. Also, can we get rid of Airbnbs? I mean, it's another rant, but can we just do that, please? Because that is breaking our communities. But anyway, that was a slightly separate thing. More imagination and more studios. Thank you.
I don't really have anything to add in terms of how, you know, what we need to create more of those spaces. I guess all I would do to stay on brand is say, if we have resources within a community to create spaces, then I think it'd be a really good idea to have deliberative processes to let citizens decide how those spaces are used, rather than have a kind of a top-down approach to that wherever possible.
Amazing, thank you so much. Before I hand back to Helen, I'll just add that, now it's gone from my mind. Yes, part of what we've been experimenting with, I guess, with the Resilience Web is how do we provide a way for people's voices or people's ideas to come to the front. So what that looks like in reality can often be doing lots of boring administration for people, for community groups, and some of those sort of low-level jobs that often become the barrier to the wider scale, because no one really wants to do that thing for free. You know, I think that's an exciting, innovative area that doesn't really get as much attention because it's not particularly sexy. And another point I should say is someone from the chat, just while we are here, is that someone has said it'd be amazing to get a resilience hub for Peterborough, and I believe there's actually someone in the chat, and I'll post in the chat there, that is helping to get one moving for Peterborough. So that person who's made that comment online, please do reach out. And my email is in the chat, so do reach out to me and we can put you in touch if you're interested in helping or contributing or know someone that might. And with that, thank you all so much for your questions, really helpful, and I'll pass back to Helen.
Great, thank you, Charlie, and thank you to everyone who's asked questions. Really great engagement. So if you have any questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, please write them down and leave them with us, and we'll send them to the panel and get them answered and have that in the report as well. So tonight, our appointed listener for this evening has been Katie. So please give us a 2-minute wrap up of what you've heard tonight.
So once again, wonderful speakers. We've learned so much from them, and they're great people as well as doing great things. And we really appreciate you spending 2 hours of your afternoon on a sunny day coming here. But I've certainly learned an awful lot. There's been so many key words about network, well-being, trust, growth, great words. But I think I'd want to sum it up by saying it's obvious we need a community room in every community centre owned by the locals, with many doors and many colours, with walls to paint and pin things onto, with good tech and very good acoustics, to assemble and to have small groups, to have a big store for art supplies, and I would add for Lego, and a place to cook and share food as well. There must be no barriers and lots of paths, a place to cry in, a place to argue, to learn, to plan in, to be warm when it's cold and cool when it's hot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you to the counselors for taking the time to be with us. Thank you to all the volunteers who have helped make this happen. That includes Charlie, who has been our superstar on the tech, Peter Tribble doing the timing, Joe and Iz, who have greeted us, greeted people and distributed flyers, and anyone who I'm forgetting, thank you for your contributions. Special thank you to Katie for helping organize all of the speakers, coordinating the space. Thank you to the council for letting us have this space for free. Thank you also to the Cambridge Room and the Resilience Web for all the support that they've given us in making this all possible. So after tonight, we will send a link to the recording. There will be links to all of the previous recordings as well. We've been having technical difficulties getting them online, but they will be up in some way as soon as possible. Please join us on May 28th for our launch party. We'll be sending out some details on that in due course. Check out also some of the community groups who have left flyers. So the People's Emergency Briefing, there's more of these on the balcony. There's also a poster about community research in Abbey that you can take a look at. And there are flyers for my art exhibition. So please take some of these and come beginning of May. If you're not on the Resilience Web, please add yourself, your group, community group, to the Resilience Web. Take a look at it, and if you find other groups that you're interested in. As mentioned many times throughout this event, the Cambridge Room is open. Stop by and check it out. This event has been produced on essentially zero budget. So if you would like to make a donation, it would be very gratefully received to help us cover our printing and advertising costs. There's a basket just outside where you can leave a donation, or we have a QR code so you can donate electronically as well. And as Charlie mentioned, following on from this series, we would love to host a more in-depth workshop about solutions. And for this, we will need more funding. So if you would like to help sponsor further work, please talk to me or any of us afterwards. So thank you all for coming. Wrapping up just a few minutes early, which is great. So please take any of the flyers and let's continue the conversation outside on the balcony so that we can clear this room, so that the staff who are staying late for us can clean up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you to everyone online. You feel free to leave.